You're listening to the Clinical Signal from Scienza Health, clinical intelligence for post-acute and long-term care.
Every time you open your mouth to speak, you're actually broadcasting this hidden medical record.
It's pretty wild to think about.
Right. I mean, the micropauses between your syllables, the invisible microscopic tremors in your vocal cords.
Even the exact fraction of a second it takes your brain to retrieve a word.
Exactly. Before you ever notice a physical symptom, your voice is already telling a really complex, highly detailed story about your neurological health.
And that's exactly what we're looking at today.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, our mission is to explore how these subtle, completely hidden characteristics of our voice can actually reveal critical health conditions.
Conditions like Parkinson's or cognitive decline.
Yeah, long before the traditional symptoms even appear. So, for our sources today, we are looking at clinical documentation and regulatory guidelines surrounding a platform called Digital Human OS.
And specifically, their flagship Digital Human.
Right, Gia. And we will get into who or what G is in just a moment. But okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Before we talk about the technology or the interface, we need to understand the raw material it's actually processing. Like, what exactly is a speech biomarker?
So a speech biomarker is an objective, measurable acoustic feature, and it's hidden right within the sound waves of your voice.
Okay, so it's not about what I'm saying.
No, not at all. In this specific context, we are not analyzing the actual words you're saying. We aren't grading your vocabulary or, your grammar.
Right.
We are analyzing the underlying acoustics. So the pitch, the rhythm, the timbre, the jitter, the shimmer.
Wow.
Yeah, and the precise millisecond durations of those micropauses between your syllables. Because, speech is actually one of the most complex physiological actions a human being performs.
Because of how many systems have to work together.
Exactly. It requires the seamless, instantaneous coordination of your brain, your central nervous system, your respiratory system, your larynx, and the articulators in your mouth.
That is a lot of moving parts.
It is. And when a neurological issue begins to develop, that incredibly fine motor control required for coordination, well, it's often the very first thing to misfire.
It sounds a bit like a seismic monitor picking up microtremors deep underground, long before an actual earthquake hits the surface.
That's a great analogy.
You're extracting this hidden signal from the everyday noise of conversation. But I want to challenge the reliability of this right out of the gate.
Sure.
Because human voices are incredibly volatile. Like, if I have a bad chest cold, my voice sounds completely different.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Or if I just drank 3 espressos, I'm talking at 1,000,000 miles an hour. If I'm stressed, my pitch goes up.
Right.
So how can an algorithm possibly distinguish between a neurodegenerative disease and the fact that I just have a raspy throat or I'm anxious today?
What's fascinating here is that the analysis operates at a resolution that entirely bypasses those macroscopic changes.
Wait, really? It just ignores a cold?
Basically, yeah. You're absolutely right that a cold changes your voice, but a cold changes the gross acoustics. I mean, it adds mucus to the vocal folds, which makes you sound raspy.
And caffeine makes me speak faster.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But beneath your conscious control and beneath those temporary physical states like a cold, there are microfluctuations in your neuromuscular timing.
And I can't fake those.
No, you cannot consciously manipulate them. The human ear completely misses them because they happen in fractions of a millisecond.
Okay, so the algorithm isn't listening for the raspiness. It's listening for something much deeper.
Precisely. Let's take Parkinson's disease as an example.
Okay.
Long before a patient develops that classic tremor in their hands, the depletion of dopamine in the brain begins to impair highly complex, rapid motor sequences.
Like speaking.
Right. The vocal folds need to open and close hundreds of times per second with absolute microscopic precision to create smooth speech.
Wow, hundreds of times per second.
Yeah. So the algorithm is listening for the incredibly subtle neuromuscular misfires in that specific tension.
Ah, I see.
Like a stiffness or an instability in the vocal fold vibration that is entirely distinct from the acoustic muffling of a chest cold.
It's measuring the physics of your neurological output.
Exactly. Not the performance or the temporary state of your throat.
That distinction changes everything. It's looking at the physiological mechanism of the sound, not the sound itself.
You've got it.
So now that we understand, the voice is this absolute goldmine of hidden high-resolution health data.
And it really is.
Who, or rather, what is actually doing the listening? Because in the post-acute care facilities we're examining today, They don't have a neurologist standing in the hallway with a highly sensitive microphone analyzing every resident.
No, they certainly don't.
Which brings us to the interface of the platform, Gia.
Right. Gia is the designated digital human for this platform running on the digital human OS.
And we need to clearly separate Gia from the technology you might have sitting in your living room.
Yes, absolutely. This is not a text-based chatbot, and it is definitely not a disembodied voice like a smart speaker. Gia is a highly sophisticated, interactive, visual, digital entity designed specifically for healthcare environments.
So if you're listening to this and trying to picture it, imagine you are a resident in a long-term care facility.
Okay.
You sit down in front of a screen, maybe a tablet or a kiosk, and you have a face-to-face conversation with this digital human.
And the whole screening process takes less than 5 minutes.
Yeah, and it's structured to feel entirely natural, just a back-and-forth chat. And a major feature highlighted in the clinical documentation is that Gia speaks 92 different languages.
92. And that language capability is a massive factor in driving patient compliance and comfort.
I can imagine.
Now, we should be precise with the sources here. The documentation does note that clinical validation for the specific acoustic biomarkers isn't universally available across all 92 of those languages just yet.
Oh, really? Why is that?
Because different languages have different baseline phonetic structures. It takes time to validate.
That makes sense.
However, having the ability to interact, to explain the screening process, and guide the resident in their native tongue, that dramatically reduces cognitive load and anxiety.
Because if an elderly patient whose first language is Mandarin is asked to perform a cognitive test in English,
Right.
the results might be skewed simply by the sheer effort of translation.
Exactly. Gia removes that friction. And while the audio is being captured, the system is simultaneously analyzing visual data points too.
Like what?
Facial expressions, microexpressions, body language, all to synthesize a more complete understanding of the resident's state.
Okay, I have to bring up the elephant in the room here.
I think I know what you're going to say.
Isn't this scenario a bit dystopian?
Yeah.
Because picture an elderly patient in a post-acute care facility. They might be feeling vulnerable, confused, or isolated.
Right.
And instead of a warm, empathetic human nurse sitting down, holding their hand, and asking how they're doing today, the facility sits them in front of a screen to talk to a digital avatar.
It does sound harsh when you put it that way.
Yeah. Doesn't introducing an AI into that intimate space feel incredibly cold?
It is the most common and, frankly, the most valid initial reaction people have to this technology.
Yeah.
But when you look at how the digital human OS is actually implemented in the field, it tells a very different story.
Okay, how so?
First, Gia's programming is deeply rooted in conversational empathy. The interaction is designed to be completely non-invasive, moving exactly at the patient's pace.
Okay.
But more importantly, Gia does not replace the human nurse. Gia is designed to complement the nursing staff by offloading a very specific mechanical task.
Because the reality of a modern care facility is that the staff is stretched incredibly thin.
Exactly. Nurses in post-acute care are managing complex medication schedules, physical therapies, and emergent health issues for dozens of residents simultaneously.
It's nonstop.
It is. If a nurse has to conduct a standardized subjective screening questionnaire, that takes a lot of time.
Oh my.
And as we established, human ears are simply incapable of hearing the microfluctuations we just talked about anyway. So by having Gia conduct this 5-minute, highly accurate acoustic screening, it gathers the objective data in the background.
And that actually frees up the nurse to focus entirely on the human element of care.
Exactly. They can spend their time providing the physical comfort, the emotional support, and the nuanced context that a machine will never be able to provide.
It removes the administrative and diagnostic burden so the humans can focus on the actual human caring.
Beautifully put.
Okay, so we have this friendly, empathetic, digital human speaking native languages, having a low-stress 5-minute chat.
Right.
But all the empathy in the world doesn't matter if the technology doesn't deliver results. We need to look at the hard clinical numbers from the sources.
Let's do it.
Because here's where it gets really interesting. The sheer scale of the data powering this platform is staggering.
It's massive.
The algorithms behind Gia aren't based on like a small university study of 100 people. They have been refined using a data set of 12.3 million patients.
And 27 billion clinical events.
27 billion.
In the realm of machine learning, data volume and data diversity are everything.
Right, you need a huge baseline.
Exactly. To find a microscopic anomaly in a voice, The algorithm first needs a topographical map of what a quote-unquote normal voice looks like across millions of different ages, accents, and physical states.
The larger the data set, the more precise the algorithm becomes at separating the actual neurological signal from the everyday noise.
Precisely. And when we look at the clinical evidence for the three main conditions GIA screens for in post-acute care, the impact of that massive data set becomes very clear.
Let's look at Parkinson's disease first.
Okay.
The numbers on Parkinson's are genuinely incredible. The clinical evidence shows an area under the curve, or AUC, of 0.97.
That's huge.
And the system achieves this by analyzing over 2,500 distinct speech biomarkers during that brief 5-minute conversation.
Wow. Now, for anyone who doesn't breathe statistical modeling every day, an AUC of 0.97 is exceptionally high.
Right, because an AUC of 1.0 would mean the test is mathematically perfect.
Exactly. 0 false positives, 0 false negatives.
And an AUC of 0.5 means the test is essentially a coin toss, right?
Yeah, offering no predictive value at all. So 0.97 means the algorithm has an incredibly high, near-perfect ability to distinguish between a patient who exhibits the hidden acoustic signs of Parkinson's and a patient who does not.
It is isolating those precise neuromuscular misfires in the vocal folds we discussed earlier.
Long before a visible tremor presents itself.
Incredible. And the platform is also screening for mental health. The sources show it detects depression with an 81.6% accuracy.
Which is very significant in an elderly population.
Definitely. I want to bridge this to our listeners for a second. Think about your own voice on days when you are totally, completely burnt out.
Yeah, you probably speak a little softer.
Right. A little slower. Maybe you don't use as much inflection.
Yes, and what you're describing is a mild version of psychomotor retardation, which is a core physiological manifestation of clinical depression.
So depression isn't just a subjective feeling of sadness.
No, it physically slows down your central nervous system. GIA is tracking specific vocal characteristics like tone, pace, and energy levels.
Because people suffering from depression consistently exhibit a flatter acoustic tone.
A flatter tone, slower speech patterns, and measurably longer pauses between thoughts.
And the AI can quantify exactly how flat or how slow those patterns are.
Comparing them against its massive 27 billion event baseline to flag early depressive episodes.
Episodes that a busy staff member might just write off as the resident having a quiet day.
Exactly.
Then there's a third major condition, cognitive decline, which is obviously a massive looming concern in skilled nursing and long-term care.
Absolutely.
GIA detects cognitive decline with a 70.8% accuracy. And I have a theory on this one.
Oh, let's hear it.
If Parkinson's is about the physical misfiring of the vocal cords, I imagine cognitive decline is more like a computer buffering.
Okay.
Like, it isn't about the sound of the hardware, it's the brain struggling to locate the right file. Is that what the AI is listening for?
That is an incredibly accurate way to look at it. Cognitive processes directly dictate how we construct our speech.
Right.
So the algorithm is evaluating verbal fluency, the complexity of the vocabulary, and the syntax.
So when someone is experiencing the early stages of cognitive decline, what happens?
They might subconsciously swap in simpler words, or their sentence structure might become slightly more fragmented. But most tellingly, they exhibit micro-hesitations while searching for a word. That buffering you mentioned.
And again, a human listener just hears a normal pause in conversation.
Right, but GIA measures the exact millisecond duration of those pauses and the structural complexity of the sentences.
Flagging those specific patterns as an early acoustic sign of cognitive impairment.
You got it.
Man, with numbers like these, 81.6% for depression, an AUC of 0.97 for Parkinson's, it's very easy to assume that this digital human is acting as a robotic doctor.
Oh, yeah.
Just sitting there making on-the-spot medical diagnoses.
But it's not.
Right. The reality of medical regulation, particularly in the United States, is vastly more complex than a machine spitting out a diagnosis. We need to be very precise about how this tool is actually classified.
We do. Because the regulatory framework dictates exactly how this technology can and cannot be used in a clinical setting.
Okay, let me lay out the strict regulatory language straight from our sources.
Yeah.
GIA is classified as 510K registered.
Right.
This means the FDA reviewed the platform and cleared it based on what they call substantial equivalence.
Substantial equivalence, yeah.
But we need to explain what that actually means for you listening.
The
FDA did not run ground-up clinical trials on this specific software.
important distinction.
They did not independently test and validate that 0.97 AUC for Parkinson's.
Right. Those high accuracy numbers come strictly from peer-reviewed clinical research and the company's own massive data sets.
Which is standard for this regulatory pathway, right?
It is standard, yeah. The 510(k) clearance basically means the manufacturer successfully demonstrated to the FDA that their device is at least as safe and effective as another legally marketed device that is already available.
So it's an administrative pathway acknowledging the tool's safety profile based on existing precedents.
Exactly. And this raises an important question. If the FDA isn't approving this as a standalone diagnostic oracle, what exactly is its legal and clinical role in a facility?
Which comes down to the strict legal difference between screening and diagnosing.
Yes. GIA never diagnoses a patient. It never treats a condition. It never prescribes a medication or alters a care plan.
It is strictly a screening tool.
Think of it as a highly advanced filter that surfaces hidden risks.
So what actually happens when the 5-minute conversation ends?
The system generates a screening report based on the acoustic data, essentially raising a flag if it detects anomalies.
But every single result, every single flag generated by GIA must be reviewed by a human clinician.
Always. The doctor or the nurse practitioner takes that objective acoustic data and combines it with their own medical expertise, the patient's full medical history, and their visual observations.
So the human clinician always makes the final determination on what the diagnosis is and what the next clinical step should be.
Exactly.
It is a sophisticated instrument for the clinician, just like an MRI machine or a blood test, not a replacement for their judgment.
Right.
And understanding how this data actually moves through a facility is critical, because a tool is only useful if it doesn't create more work.
Oh, absolutely.
According to the documentation, after a patient finishes their chat with GIA, the results are delivered to the clinical staff in under 60 seconds.
Which is vital. Speed is vital, especially if the system flags an acute depressive episode or sudden cognitive confusion.
And naturally, the entire pipeline is IP Act compliant.
Of course. But what really makes this viable for a busy post-acute care facility is the integration. The digital human OS integrates directly into major electronic health record, or EHR, systems.
This means the nurses aren't forced to look at the results on GIA's tablet, write them down on a sticky note, and then go manually type them into the main computer system at the nurse's station.
Exactly. Because anyone who works in healthcare will tell you that siloed technology is a nightmare.
Yeah. The data from GIA flows seamlessly into the resident's central chart, drastically reducing the administrative burden.
Furthermore, the hardware itself is highly controlled to protect patient privacy.
Right. Tell us about that.
GIA is bundled securely on Samsung health-grade Galaxy devices, utilizing Samsung Knox for an enterprise-grade, hardware-level layer of security.
So it is essentially a lockdown, highly secure medical appliance, not just a casual app you download from an app store onto a personal iPad.
Exactly.
So we know what the speech biomarkers are. We understand the incredible millisecond resolution data GIA is capturing. We've seen the massive clinical data sets, and we are clear on the strict regulatory boundaries it operates within.
Yes.
So what does this all mean? How does this actually change the day-to-day life of a patient living in a care facility, or for you, if you are navigating care for an aging parent?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, technologies like GIA are fundamentally shifting post-acute care from a reactive model to a highly proactive one.
Proactive, right, because historically, healthcare, especially in long-term care, has been reactionary.
We wait for a resident to suffer a fall due to motor control loss.
Or we wait for a severe depressive episode.
Or we wait until a Parkinson's tremor is so pronounced that it is spilling their coffee.
And by the time those physical symptoms are visible to the naked eye, the underlying neurological disease has already progressed significantly.
Sadly, yes.
But with continuous voice screening, you are catching the subtle, invisible signs months, maybe even years, before that first physical symptom ever presents itself.
Precisely. And early detection completely changes the trajectory of care. Well, if GIA's screening flags the very early acoustic signs of Parkinson's, the clinician doesn't have to wait for the tremor. They can immediately order targeted support.
They can initiate speech therapy to preserve vocal cord function.
Or occupational therapy while the resident still has a high level of baseline mobility.
So it optimizes the facility's resource allocation, ensuring the right preventative care gets to the right resident at exactly the right time.
Rather than just doing damage control after the fact.
It fundamentally changes the conversation with the families, too.
Oh, completely.
If the acoustic markers indicate that cognitive decline is on the horizon, the care team can initiate those difficult but entirely necessary conversations with the resident and their family much earlier.
Right. You can ensure the residents' wishes, their legal affairs, and their care preferences are documented and respected.
While they still have the full, uncompromised capacity to express them.
It provides everyone involved with the gift of time.
It really does. It allows the facility to potentially slow the progression of the disease through early targeted therapies.
Which ultimately maintains the residents' independence, their safety, and their dignity for as long as possible.
It is truly incredible how much diagnostic power is hidden in something as simple and as common as a 5-minute conversation.
It really is.
Which brings me to a thought I haven't been able to shake since we started looking into these sources.
What's that?
Well, we've been discussing this strictly in the context of post-acute care, like a formalized screening with a digital human in a clinical setting.
Right.
But think about your own life right now. Think about the massive archive of your digital voice footprints currently sitting on servers all over the world.
Oh, wow. It is a staggering amount of unstructured data.
Right. Years and years of saved voicemails, thousands of quick voice memos you've texted to friends, endless hours of recorded video calls for work.
That's a lot of audio.
If a simple 5-minute conversation today can reveal the early acoustic signs of Parkinson's or cognitive decline with such high accuracy,
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
what might happen when these machine learning algorithms eventually look backward?
That's a huge question.
What might the digital echo of your own voice, captured meticulously over decades, eventually reveal about the lifelong trajectory of your own neurological health?
Well, that is a fascinating and terrifying thought.
Is definitely something to think about the next time you leave a message after the beep. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
You've been listening to The Clinical Signal with David Kaiser. To learn more about GIA and multimodal clinical screening, visit Scienza. Thanks for listening to The Clinical Signal from Scienza Health. New episodes every week. Learn more at scienzahealth.com.